Poor single mother is kicked out with her elderly mother from her uncle's house, but what they find changes everything. If you want to discover the incredible turn of fate, subscribe now. Tell us which city you are listening from today. Now let's begin. The front door of the house slammed shut with a sound like a broken bone. It was a final, brutal punctuation mark on a sentence of cruelty that had been spoken for weeks. Elena stood on the cracked concrete path, the cold autumn wind whipping strands of her dark hair across her face. In her arms, she clutched her son, Leo, a tiny bundle wrapped in a thin, worn blanket. The baby, only 6 months old, stirred against her, his small warmth a stark contrast to the icy dread flooding her veins. Beside her, her grandmother, Sophia, stood ramrod straight, her face a mask of dignified fury, though her frail hands trembled on the handle of a single battered cardboard suitcase. The leaden-gray sky overhead seemed to press down on them, mirroring the crushing weight in Elena's chest. Through the window, she could see the smirking faces of her uncles, Luis and Jorge. Luis, the elder, raised a glass in a mocking toast, his eyes cold and hard like river stones. Jorge, ever the weaker shadow, looked away, a flicker of something that might have been shame quickly extinguished by fear of his brother. They were vultures, and they had finally picked the bones of her mother's memory clean. "You can't do this," Elena had pleaded just moments before, her voice cracking. "This was Mama's house. This is her mother's home." Luis had laughed, a sound rough like sandpaper. "Your mother is gone, you little fool, and this old woman." He had gestured with contempt at Sophia, his own mother. "She has nothing. The paperwork is signed. The house is ours. We were generous. We let you stay this long after the funeral." Generous. The word was a slap. They had circled ever since her mother, Maria, had succumbed to a swift and sudden illness. They had offered condolences that felt like threats, and help that felt like a tightening rope. Elena, lost in a fog of grief and the exhausting demands of a newborn, had been too broken to see the trap closing around her. Her partner, Marco, the father of her child, had vanished the moment she told him she was pregnant, his parting words a scar on her heart. "That is your problem. It was a mistake." She was utterly alone, save for her grandmother and her baby. Sophia had faced her sons with a fire that belied her 80 years. "You two are a disgrace to your father's name," she had said, her voice low, but carrying the weight of absolute moral clarity. "You are not my sons. My sons would not do this. You are strangers whose hearts are poisoned with greed." Luis had sneered, taking a step toward his mother. "Careful, old woman. Don't forget who holds all the cards now." He had delighted in showing them the forged documents, the title transfer he'd had Sophia sign when she was sick with grief and her eyes were clouded with tears, telling her it was just an insurance form. Now outside, the cold was beginning to seep through Elena's thin sweater. She looked at the house, the only home she had ever known. Every brick was a memory. Her father, teaching her to ride a bike on this very path. Her mother planting roses in the small garden, now choked with weeds. It was all being stolen. As a final theatrical act of cruelty, Luis had opened the door a crack and tossed a single crumpled dollar bill onto the ground. "Here," he'd spat. "I'm a generous man. I just bought your share of that worthless patch of desert your grandfather owned. A condemned cabin on 100 acres of nothing. I'll sell it to you for $1. Now you have a home. Go live in it. You and that creature and the old woman." He had laughed again as he slammed the door. The dollar bill skittered across the concrete, a final bitter insult. Elena looked at her grandmother. Sophia's eyes were filled with a terrible sorrow, not for herself, but for the sons she no longer recognized. She reached out a trembling hand and touched Elena's cheek. "We do not beg, my child. We have our dignity. It is the only thing they cannot steal." Elena nodded, a single hot tear finally escaping and tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. She looked down at Leo, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the storm that had just broken over their lives. A fierce, protective resolve solidified in her heart, turning her fear into something hard and sharp. She remembered her mother's words from years ago, a quiet warning. "Be careful of your uncles, Elena. Their love for money is a sickness." She had not understood then. She understood now. Bending down, not to pick up the dollar but to adjust the blanket around her son, she straightened up and took a deep breath of the cold, hostile air. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She would not let them win. She took Sophia's arm, her other hand supporting the weight of her sleeping baby. Together, the 3 generations of abandoned women turned their backs on the house and began to walk away, their shadows stretching long and thin behind them. They walked toward the road, toward an unknown future, with nothing but a single suitcase, a baby, and a dignity that burned brighter than any stolen inheritance. The road stretched out before them, like a long gray ribbon of despair, vanishing into a horizon that promised nothing. The world felt vast and indifferent. The sun was a pale, watery disk behind the clouds, offering no warmth. Cars and trucks roared past, their occupants faceless and distant, sealed in their own worlds, oblivious to the small, tragic procession on the shoulder of the highway. Each passing vehicle kicked up a cloud of dust and grit that stung Elena's eyes and made the baby cough in his sleep. Hope was a word their hearts no longer seemed to remember. They walked for what felt like an eternity. The weight of Leo in her arms grew heavier with every step, a leaden ache that spread from her shoulders down her spine. Sophia, despite her iron will, began to falter, her breath coming in shallow rasps. The cardboard suitcase seemed to gain weight, its handle digging into her palm. The landscape was monotonous and cruel. Dry, cracked earth, skeletal bushes, and the occasional cactus standing like a silent, thorny sentinel, judging their hopeless pilgrimage. After an hour that felt like a day, Sophia stumbled. Elena quickly shifted Leo to one arm, grabbing her grandmother to steady her. "We need to rest, abuela." They found a sliver of shade beneath a lonely, twisted mesquite tree a few yards from the road. Elena gently lowered Sophia to the ground, her grandmother's face pale and etched with exhaustion. She sat beside her, carefully laying the now fussy Leo on her lap. The baby began to cry, a thin, hungry wail that pierced the desolate silence. The sound was a knife in Elena's already wounded heart. It was the sound of her own failure. That small, desperate cry transported her back months earlier, to a brightly lit cafe with cheerful music playing. She was sitting across from Marco, her heart fluttering with a mix of terror and excitement. She had just told him she was pregnant. She remembered the way his smile had frozen, then melted away into a mask of cold panic. "You can't be serious," he had said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I am," she'd replied, her own voice barely audible. "Marco, we're going to have a baby." He had stared at her, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "We? There is no we in this, Elena. I told you I wasn't ready for anything serious." "But I thought you loved me." He had let out a short, cruel laugh. "Love? We had fun, that's all it was. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly on the tile floor. He threw some bills on the table. That is your problem. It was a mistake. Get rid of it. Or don't. I don't care. Just don't ever contact me again. He had walked out without a backward glance, leaving her alone amidst the clatter of plates and the laughter of other couples. He had abandoned her and their unborn child as easily as one might discard a piece of trash. The memory was so vivid, the pain so fresh, that Elena flinched. The baby's cries grew louder, pulling her back to the present, to this new, even deeper circle of hell. Sophia reached over and placed a wrinkled hand on Leo's tiny head, murmuring soft, soothing sounds in Spanish. "Shh, mi pequeño león. Shh, my little lion. Your mama is here. Your great-grandmother is here. We are strong." Slowly, the baby's cries subsided into small, hiccuping sobs. Elena looked at her grandmother, her own eyes brimming with tears of gratitude and despair. "What are we going to do, Abuela? They took everything. Marco left us. My uncles. My own uncles." Sophia's gaze was steady, her eyes holding a wisdom as ancient as the desert around them. "Hate is a poison, my child," she said softly, her voice raspy but firm. "It is a poison that only you drink, expecting the other person to die. Do not let them poison you. We will not think of them. We will think of the next step. And then the one after that." Her simple, profound words cut through Elena's panic. She was right. Wasting energy on hating Luis and Jorge or mourning Marco would not feed her child or shelter her grandmother. It would only consume what little strength she had left. She had to focus on the next step. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of an engine grew louder. A dusty pickup truck was approaching, slowing as it neared them. A flicker of hope, fragile and treacherous, ignited in Elena's chest. Was it someone stopping to help? The truck, a rusty old Ford, pulled over onto the shoulder just ahead of them. A man with a weathered face and a stained cowboy hat leaned out the window. He squinted at them, his gaze lingering for a moment too long. Elena held her breath. Then, without a word, he spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the asphalt, shook his head as if in disgust, and accelerated away, leaving them enveloped in a choking cloud of exhaust and brown dust. The fragile hope in Elena's chest shattered into a million pieces. The dust settled, coating them in another layer of grime, a physical manifestation of their humiliation. Despair, thick and suffocating, washed over her again. It was as if the whole world had conspired to reject them. But as the dust cloud cleared, her eyes, scanning the bleak horizon, caught something. Far in the distance, almost lost in the shimmering heat haze, was a dark shape. It was too low and square to be a hill. It looked like a structure, a building. She squinted, shielding her eyes with her hand. It was barely a silhouette, a smudge against the pale sky, semi-hidden by a cluster of dry, thorny bushes. Could it be the condemned cabin her uncle had mocked them with? It was in the right direction, deep in the expanse of land her grandfather had once owned. Fear warred with a desperate, pragmatic need. It was a structure. It could mean shelter from the wind and the coming night. The temperature was already dropping, and they could not survive a night in the open. "Abuela," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Look!" She pointed. Sophia followed her gaze, her old eyes straining. "A house." "Maybe," Elena whispered. "It's a long way off, but it's something." She made a decision. It was a wild gamble, a choice born of having no other choices left. They would walk toward it. Whatever it was, it had to be better than this desolate roadside. With a deep breath, Elena rose to her feet, lifting Leo back into her arms. She helped her grandmother up, and together they left the highway, stepping onto the cracked, unforgiving earth of the desert. They began their slow trek toward the distant silhouette, a tiny forgotten cabin that was their only and most terrifying hope. The journey from the road to the house was an ordeal in itself. The ground was uneven, littered with sharp rocks and thorny plants that tore at their clothes and scratched their ankles. With every step, the illusion of proximity dissolved, the house seeming to retreat further into the desert haze. The sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. A cold wind picked up, whispering through the dry scrub brush with a mournful sound. Finally, after what felt like another hour of painful walking, they reached it. The structure was an old adobe house, its walls the color of the earth from which it was made. It was small and square, with a flat roof and a single weathered wooden door. Time and neglect had been cruel to it. The adobe was cracked and crumbling in places, and a few skeletal bushes grew right up against the walls as if trying to reclaim it. It looked less like a home and more like a tombstone marking a forgotten life. This had to be the condemned cabin Luis had jeered about. Elena's heart sank. It looked utterly abandoned, likely for decades. But it had 4 walls and a roof. It was shelter. "Stay here, abuela," she whispered, handing the sleeping baby to Sophia. With her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs, she approached the door. There was no handle, just a small hole where a latch might have been. She pushed. The wood was rough and splintered against her palm. With a groan of protest, the door creaked open. The sound was eerie, like a suffering soul finally speaking after a long silence. A wave of stale, musty air washed over her, the smell of dust, decay, and the faint, unsettling scent of mice. She peered into the gloom. The interior was a single large room, choked with shadows. The last of the evening light filtered weakly through a grimy, cobweb-covered window, revealing the ghostly shapes of furniture shrouded in dusty white sheets. In the center of the far wall stood a large fireplace, its hearth black with ancient soot and filled with more cobwebs that glistened like silver thread. It was desolate. It was forgotten, but it was dry, and most importantly, it was a barrier against the biting wind. "It's empty," she called back to Sophia, her voice sounding small and strange in the enclosed space. "But it will keep us warm." Together, they entered, pulling the heavy door closed behind them. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by their own breathing and the rustle of some unseen creature in the walls. For the first time since being thrown out of her home, Elena felt something that was not pure, paralyzing fear. It was a tiny, fragile spark of something else, not quite hope, but a grim sense of survival. They had found a refuge, however wretched. The first morning in the adobe house dawned with a sliver of pale light, forcing its way through the grimy window. Elena had barely slept. Her body curled protectively around Leo on the dusty floor, starting at every creak of the old house and every howl of the wind. Sophia had slept fitfully in a corner, wrapped in her thin coat. As the light grew, Elena began to explore their new, grim sanctuary. The main room served as a living area and kitchen. Pulling back a dusty sheet, she uncovered a sturdy wooden table and 2 chairs. In a corner, a simple counter held a rusted hand pump. Her heart leaped. A pump meant a well. With trembling hands, she grabbed the handle and began to pump. For a long moment, there was only a dry, gasping sound. Her shoulders sagged, but she kept trying, putting all her weight into it. Then a shudder ran through the pipe, followed by a gurgle, and finally a trickle of brown, murky water sputtered from the spout. She kept pumping, and soon the water ran clearer. It was water, clean, cold water. Tears of relief welled in her eyes. They would not die of thirst. Her discovery spurred her into action. She found a few old pots and pans, coated in dust, but intact. In a small pantry, hidden behind a curtain of cobwebs, she found a miracle. Sealed in old tin canisters were dry beans, rice, and a small amount of flour. It was ancient, but it was food. It was survival. While Sophia watched Leo, who was now awake and curiously looking around the strange new room, Elena set to work. She built a small fire outside, using one of the old pots to boil the well water until it was safe to drink. She cleaned the fireplace, sweeping out decades of soot and debris, preparing it for the evening. She washed the dust from the table and chairs. The simple acts of cleaning and preparing, of making a space livable, were a balm to her shattered spirit. She was not just a victim, she was a survivor. She was fighting back. As she cooked a simple meal of boiled beans and rice, the first real food they had eaten in over a day, Sophia looked around the small, dusty room with a strange expression on her face. "This place," she said slowly, her voice distant. "It feels familiar. I cannot explain it." Elena dismissed it as a trick of memory, her grandmother's mind perhaps conflating this desolate place with some other long ago. But the comment lingered in the air, another small mystery in this house of secrets. Later that afternoon, Elena turned her attention back to the fireplace. It was the heart of the small house, the only source of heat against the coming night's cold. As she swept the last of the debris from the hearth, her hand brushed against one of the bricks at the back. It wobbled. Curious, she pushed it. The brick moved inward, dislodging easily from the surrounding mortar, which had crumbled to dust over the years. A dark, hollow space was revealed behind it. Her heart began to pound. What was this? A hiding place? Reaching into the cold, dark cavity, her fingers brushed against something hard and wooden. With her breath held tight in her chest, she carefully pulled it out. It was a small wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, its surface covered in a thick layer of soot and dust. It was bound with a simple, rusted iron latch. Her hands trembled as she carried it over to the table where the afternoon light fell. For a moment, she allowed herself a wild fantasy. Was it money? Gold? Some long-forgotten treasure that would solve all their problems? With a small rock, she pried the rusted latch open. It sprang free with a sharp click. Lifting the lid, her initial hope for gold vanished. There was no treasure inside, at least not the kind she had imagined. The box was filled with a bundle of old letters, tied together with a faded blue ribbon that was so fragile it looked like it might turn to dust if she touched it. Beneath the letters lay a small, leather-bound diary. Disappointment warred with curiosity. She gently lifted the bundle of letters. They were brittle with age. Sophia came over, peering at the box with wide eyes. "What is it, child?" "Letters," Elena said, carefully untying the crumbling ribbon. She unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, written in faded brown ink. She began to read aloud. "My dearest Arturo," it began. Arturo. That was her grandfather's name. He had passed away years ago, a quiet, kind man she barely remembered. She continued reading. The letters were from a woman named Isabella. They spoke of a secret love, of stolen moments, and a deep, profound connection. Isabella wrote that she was a migrant worker, hired to help on the ranch, when Arturo's first wife, Sophia's mother, was ill. But it was Arturo himself who had fallen sick with a fever, and Isabella had nursed him back to health. In those quiet, feverish weeks, a bond had formed, one that transcended their different stations in life, a love that was impossible and dangerous. Elena looked up at her grandmother. Sophia's face was a storm of conflicting emotions, shock, confusion, but strangely, not anger. "My Arturo," she whispered, sinking into a chair. "A whole life I shared with that man, and I knew nothing of this." She had married Arturo a few years after his first wife had passed. He had always been a good husband, but there had been a quiet sadness in him she could never quite reach. With trembling hands, Elena picked up the small leather diary. She opened it to the first page. It was Isabella's diary. It detailed the same story as the letters, but with more intimacy, more fear. Then came the entry that made Elena's blood run cold. Isabella was pregnant with Arturo's child. He was overjoyed, but terrified. His family would never accept it. He promised to build a place for her, a safe haven where they could be a family. He built this very house, this small adobe cabin in the middle of his most remote parcel of land. It was not a worthless, condemned shack. It was a secret home, built with love. The diary went on. A son was born. They named him Miguel. They had a few precious happy months here, hidden from the world. But then tragedy struck. The baby, Miguel, grew sick. Isabella wrote of her panic, her fear of losing him. The final entries were frantic, desperate. She had to get him to a real doctor in a bigger city. She couldn't wait for Arturo. She wrote that she was fleeing, taking the child, and heading west, praying she could save him. She left the letters and the diary for Arturo, a testament to their love, in case she never returned. Elena and Sophia sat in stunned silence, the story of this secret family echoing in the dusty air of the house built to shelter them. This wasn't just an abandoned cabin. It was a part of their family's history. It was a monument to a secret love and a terrible loss. As Elena gently placed the diary back in the box, her fingers brushed against the bottom. It felt uneven. A false bottom. Her heart leaped again. Using her fingernail, she pried at the edge. A thin wooden panel lifted up, revealing a hidden compartment underneath. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single folded document. It was old, the paper yellowed and crisp. Elena carefully unfolded it. It was a property deed, a deed for this house and the 100 acres of land it sat on. And the name on the deed was not Arturo. The property was registered in the name of his son, Miguel. The breath left Elena's body in a rush. This house, this land. It didn't belong to her grandfather's estate. It had been legally deeded to his secret son 50 years ago, which meant her uncles, Luis and Jorge, had absolutely no claim to it. Their cruel, mocking gift of a worthless cabin was, in fact, a property they had never owned in the first place. The refugee they had stumbled into was, by a twist of fate, their rightful legacy. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in Elena's throat. The irony was so thick, so perfect, it was almost painful. They had been cast out, only to land in the one place that was truly, legally, theirs to inherit, through a line they never knew existed. But their moment of stunning revelation was violently shattered. From the darkness outside, a sound cut through the night, the sound of a powerful engine growing closer. Then a pair of brilliant headlights swept across the desert, pinning their small, isolated house in a harsh, white glare. Terror, cold and familiar, seized Elena's heart. They had seen the smoke from her cooking fire. They had followed it. Her uncles had found them. "Get down!" Elena hissed, her voice a raw whisper. She blew out the single candle that had been flickering on the table. plunging the room into near total darkness. She grabbed the precious box, stuffing the letters and the deed back inside, and scrambled toward the darkest corner of the room, pulling a stunned Sophia with her. They huddled together behind a large, sheet-covered piece of furniture, Elena's body shielding her grandmother and the baby, who had thankfully remained asleep. The engine cut out, and the world was plunged into an even more terrifying silence. Then came the crunch of heavy boots on the gravelly soil outside. A thick, angry voice sliced through the night. It was Luis. "I know you're in there. I saw the smoke, you little brat. Think you can hide from me?" The front door rattled violently as someone threw their weight against it. The old wood groaned but held. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might burst. She held her breath, praying they would give up, praying they would think the house was empty. Another slam against the door, harder this time. Then a splintering crash. The door burst open, slamming against the interior wall. Two dark silhouettes filled the doorway, black shapes against the moonlit desert. Luis and Jorge. "Where are you?" Luis roared into the darkness, his voice echoing in the small space. He flicked on a powerful flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp white cone through the dusty air, sweeping across the room like a prison searchlight. It passed over their hiding spot, lingered, and then swept on. "There's no one here, Luis," Jorge stammered, his voice thin and reedy with fear. "It's just an old empty shack. Let's go." "She's here," Luis growled, his obsession a palpable force in the room. "She has to be. Where else would she go?" His flashlight beam danced manically around the room, illuminating the ghostly sheet-draped furniture. He was like a rabid dog on a scent. He kicked at a small table, sending it crashing to the floor. "I know you're hiding. Come out!" He took a step closer to their hiding spot. Elena could smell the sour scent of cheap whiskey on his breath, even from several feet away. His gaze fell upon the still warm ashes in the fireplace. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Fresh embers," he said, his voice dripping with malicious satisfaction. "You're here, and you're going to pay for making me come all the way out to this dump." He turned his attention to Sophia. "And you, old woman, hiding with this little thief. I should have known you'd take her side." He took another step, his shadow looming over them. He reached out a hand, intending to rip the sheet from the furniture they were hiding behind. Sophia let out a small, terrified gasp. That sound was the spark that ignited the gunpowder in Elena's soul. The fear that had paralyzed her for days transformed in an instant into a white-hot, protective rage. She would not let this monster terrorize her grandmother. Not anymore. Springing up from her hiding place, she placed herself between the hulking form of her uncle and her grandmother. "Leave her alone," she screamed, her voice raw with a fury she didn't know she possessed. "Don't you dare touch her!" Luis recoiled, genuinely surprised by her sudden appearance and defiance. His surprise quickly curdled back into anger. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like claws. "You little brat! You think you can stand up to me? Where is it? Where's the money you stole from the house?" "We stole nothing," Elena cried, wincing in pain, but refusing to back down. "You are the thief. You stole everything from us." "Lies!" he roared, his face contorted with rage. He raised his other hand, and for a terrifying second, Elena thought he was going to strike her. Suddenly, a blinding white light flooded the doorway, silhouetting them all. A new voice, calm but carrying an undeniable authority, cut through the tense standoff. "What is going on here?" Everyone froze. Standing in the doorway was a tall man, his frame solid and powerful. He was dressed in simple work clothes, and in his hand he held a large, heavy-duty flashlight that illuminated the entire chaotic scene. He wasn't a police officer, but there was something about his quiet, commanding presence that was more intimidating than any uniform. Luis instantly released Elena's arm, his aggression deflating into defensive posturing. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, trying to sound tough, but failing. "This is private property. Get out." The stranger took a step into the room, his gaze sweeping over the scene. Luis and Jorge, red-faced and guilty, Elena, defiant but trembling, Sophia, huddled and terrified, his eyes, calm and steady, finally rested on Elena. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Before Elena could answer, Luis blustered, "This is a family matter. It's none of your business." The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly, fixing on Luis. "It becomes my business when I see two men terrorizing two women in a house I happen to keep an eye on. I live just over that ridge," he said, gesturing vaguely into the darkness. "I saw your headlights. Figured I'd check out the commotion." He took another step forward, and Luis and Jorge instinctively took a step back. "I know who you two are, the Flores brothers. Your reputation precedes you in this county." The mention of their name and reputation seemed to land like a physical blow. The last of Luis's bravado crumbled. He knew they were caught, and this stranger was not someone to be trifled with. "This isn't over," Luis snarled at Elena, his voice a venomous whisper. It was a coward's threat, delivered as he was already backing toward the door. "You will pay for this." Jorge, who had been silent and trembling the entire time, practically scrambled out of the house behind his brother. They piled into their truck, and with a roar of the engine and a spray of gravel they were gone, swallowed by the darkness from which they came. Silence descended once more, but this time it was a silence filled with relief and the stranger's steady presence. He clicked off his powerful flashlight, and the room returned to the soft glow of the moonlight. "Thank you," Elena whispered, her body finally starting to shake with delayed reaction. "They would have... I don't know what they would have done." "I'm just glad I got here in time," the man said. He had a kind face, weathered by the sun, and clear, honest eyes. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. "My name is David." "I'm Elena. This is my grandmother, Sophia." David nodded to Sophia, respectfully. "Ma'am." He looked around the dilapidated room. "What are you doing out here? This old place hasn't been lived in for 50 years. The story tumbled out of Elena, a torrent of words fueled by adrenaline and gratitude. She told him about her mother's death, the uncle's greed, the forged papers, being thrown out with her baby and grandmother. She told him about the cruel joke of being sold this cabin for $1. David listened patiently, his expression growing harder as she spoke. When she finished, he shook his head slowly. "Your uncles are worse than I heard." He paused, a strange, thoughtful look on his face. "This house. My mother used to talk about it." Elena's head snapped up. "Your mother?" "Yes. Her name was Isabella," David said, his voice taking on a distant quality. "She passed away a few years ago. She never told me much about her early life, only that she came from this area. She told me stories about a secret house in the desert, a place her heart never left. She said it was built for her by a man she loved very much." The air in the room grew thick with unspoken possibility. Elena's heart began to beat fast again, but this time it was not with fear. She stared at David, at his kind, weathered face, at his honest eyes. Isabella, she whispered, her voice trembling. Did she ever mention a man named Arturo? David's eyes widened in shock. Arturo Flores, that was his name. How could you possibly know that? Without a word, Elena went to the corner and retrieved the wooden box. She brought it to the table and with hands that shook, opened it. She handed the small leather diary to David. My mother's name, she said, her voice thick with emotion, was Isabella. David took the diary, his strong, calloused fingers tracing the worn leather cover. He opened it, and his gaze fell upon the elegant, familiar handwriting. He began to read, his breath catching in his throat. He read about the secret love, the hidden house, the birth of a son. He read about the sickness and the desperate flight to save the baby's life. He looked up at Elena, his eyes shining with unshed tears. She saved me, he whispered. She got me to a doctor in California. We never came back. She changed our names. She always told me she was protecting me from a past that would only bring me pain. He looked at the diary, at the name written there. My name. My name was Miguel. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, with breathtaking clarity. This man, this kind stranger, who had appeared like a guardian angel from the darkness, was Miguel. He was the baby from the diary. He was the secret son of her grandfather, Arturo. He was her mother's half-brother. He was her uncle. Sophia, who had been watching the entire exchange with a dawning, wondrous understanding, slowly got to her feet. She walked over to David and looked up into his face, her eyes searching his features. She saw the ghost of her late husband there, in the line of his jaw, the set of his eyes. You are my husband's son, she said, her voice filled with a quiet, profound certainty. She reached out and took his hand. You are blood of my blood. You are family. A single tear finally escaped David's eye and traced a path through the dust on his cheek. He looked from Sophia to Elena, and then to the sleeping baby. A lifetime of questions, of a past shrouded in secrecy, was suddenly answered in this dusty, forgotten house. Elena handed him the deed she had found in the false bottom of the box, the deed to this house and this land, registered in the name of Miguel Flores. David looked at the document, then back at them. A new resolve hardened his gentle features. They will not hurt you again, he said, his voice low and firm with a sacred promise. They cast you out, but fate brought you home. This is my house, and now my house is your house. You are not alone anymore. The very next morning, the adobe house began its transformation. David arrived not in a dusty pickup, but in a newer, more powerful truck, its bed loaded with supplies. He brought a small generator that hummed to life, flooding the dark cabin with the miracle of electric light. He brought boxes of food, fresh milk, diapers and formula for Leo, and thick, warm blankets. He brought tools and lumber. The ruin began to feel like a home. The work was hard, but it was a healing labor. David, with a quiet, practical competence, showed Elena how to board up the cracked sections of the adobe walls to keep out the wind. He fixed the broken front door, fitting it with a new, sturdy lock. Together they scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, and aired out the musty smell of decades of neglect. The physical act of building and cleaning was a potent antidote to their feelings of helplessness. With every nail hammered and every surface scrubbed, Elena felt a piece of her own strength returning. She was no longer just a victim of her circumstances. She was an architect of her own survival. In the evenings, the three of them, David, Elena, and Sophia, would sit by the warmth of the fireplace, the generator humming softly outside. A new kind of family was being forged in the desert night. Sophia, her memory sparked by David's presence, would share stories of a young Arturo, painting a picture of the man he was before life had etched sadness into his features. David, in turn, shared stories of his mother, Isabella, a strong, resilient woman who had raised him on her own, always carrying a secret sorrow for the life and the love she had left behind. Elena listened, absorbing this new history, feeling the roots of her own identity growing deeper, stronger. She watched David as he spoke, admiring his quiet strength, his innate kindness. He never looked at her with pity, only with respect. He treated her as an equal, a partner in this strange new venture, and she saw the way he looked at Leo, a gentle fondness in his eyes that made her own heart ache with a new, unfamiliar emotion. A few days later, David announced, "It's time." They drove into the small county seat, a town an hour away. They went to the county records office, a quiet, dusty building that smelled of old paper. Elena's hands were clammy with nerves. David, however, was a pillar of calm. He laid out the evidence on the clerk's counter. Isabella's diary, the original deed in the name of Miguel Flores, his own birth certificate showing his original name, and a sworn, notarized statement from Sophia, testifying that David was, to the best of her knowledge, the son of her late husband, Arturo Flores. The clerk, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, examined everything meticulously. She cross-referenced old property maps and birth records. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up, a small smile on her face. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Flores," she said, addressing David by his birth name. "This property, Lot 7B, has been in a state of legal limbo for 50 years. With this evidence, we can officially register the title in your name, David Miguel Flores." Walking out of that office into the bright sunlight, Elena felt as if a physical weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It was real. It was official. The adobe house and the land it stood on belonged to David. It belonged to their family. They were no longer squatters. They were landowners. On the drive back, David's expression was grimly determined. "Now," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, "let's go pay a visit to my half-brothers." They did not go back to the adobe house. Instead, David drove directly to the house in Las Cruces, the home from which Elena and Sophia had been so cruelly expelled. He parked the truck directly in front of the house. Luis's car was in the driveway. Elena's heart hammered in her chest, but she got out of the truck with David and Sophia. This time, she would not be a victim. David knocked on the door, a loud, authoritative rap. After a moment, it was opened by Jorge, who blanched when he saw who was standing on the porch. "What do you want?" he stammered. "We're here to talk to Luis," David said, his voice calm and cold. He walked right past Jorge into the house with Elena and Sophia following closely behind. Luis was in the living room, a bottle of whiskey on the table beside him. He leaped to his feet when he saw them, his face flushing with anger. "Get out of my house," he bellowed. "Actually," David said, his voice dangerously quiet, "we've just come from the county records office. It seems you made a little mistake. The cabin you so generously sold to Elena. You never owned it. It was never part of our father's estate. It belongs to me." Luis stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "What are you talking about? Father? You're not—" "My name is Miguel Flores," David stated, letting the name hang in the air. "Arturo Flores was my father. This woman," he said, gesturing to Sophia, "is my stepmother, and Elena is my niece. You, it seems, are my half-brother, and you are trespassing on my goodwill." The color drained from Luis's face. Denial warred with dawning, panicked realization. "Lies! My father didn't have other children. This is a trick." Jorge was trembling, looking from David to Luis, the foundation of his world crumbling beneath him. "Luis, is it true? Could it be true?" "Of course not, you idiot," Luis snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. David took a step forward. "The game is over, Luis. You built your little kingdom on lies and theft. You preyed on your own mother and your niece, but that ends today. You will leave them alone. You will not come near my property, and you will not come near my family again. Is that understood?" Luis, cornered and enraged, did the only thing a coward could do. He grabbed the phone. "I'm calling the police. I'm telling them you broke into my house, that you're squatting on my land." "Go ahead," David said with a calm shrug. "I'd be happy to explain the situation to the sheriff." 20 minutes later, a county sheriff's deputy arrived. Luis, full of bluster, told a wild story of trespassers and con artists. The officer listened patiently, then turned to David. David calmly explained who he was and presented the freshly certified copy of his property title. The officer examined the document, then looked at David, and then at the sputtering Luis. "Mr. Flores," the officer said to Luis, his voice laced with official annoyance, "this document seems perfectly legal. This man," he gestured to David, "is the legal owner of the desert property. As for this house, if your mother wishes to contest the title transfer she signed, she'll need to do so with a lawyer. But as things stand, you are wasting my time. If I get another frivolous call from this address, I'll arrest you for misuse of police resources. Do you understand me?" The humiliation was total. Luis stood there, defeated and exposed, his face a mask of impotent fury. The officer gave a nod to David and Sophia, then left. David turned to his half-brothers one last time. "This is your only warning. Stay away." They walked out of that house, leaving Luis and Jorge in the ruins of their greed. As Elena got back into the truck, she felt a sense of victory so profound it was almost dizzying. The power had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a righteous strength. If this story has moved you so far, if you have felt Elena's anguish and Sophia's strength, leave a like and stay until the end, because what comes now is even more exciting. A few days later, there was one last ghost to exorcise. Elena knew she had to close the door to her past completely. She asked David to drive her into the city. She went to the sleek, modern office building where Marco worked. She didn't call. She just showed up. The receptionist tried to stop her, but Elena walked past her desk and straight to his office door. She found him on the phone, laughing with a client. He saw her, and the laugh died in his throat. He quickly ended the call. "Elena, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice a mix of annoyance and alarm. "I just came to tell you something," she said, her voice steady and clear. She looked him right in the eye, feeling none of the pain or longing she had feared. She felt nothing but a distant pity. "You have a son. His name is Leo. He is beautiful, and he is strong." Marco shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. He looked panicked. "Listen, Elena, I can give you some money to help out." He started fumbling for his wallet. Elena held up a hand, stopping him. "I don't want your money, Marco. I don't want anything from you. I just thought you had a right to know the truth. You have a son in this world." She paused, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "When I needed help, it arrived, but it didn't come from you. It came from family I never knew I had." She turned and walked away, leaving him sitting there, stunned and speechless. As she walked out of the building and back into the sunlight where David was waiting for her, she felt the last toxic tie to her old life break. She was free. "Let's go home," she said as she got into the truck. And for the first time, the word home didn't refer to a place that had been stolen from her, but to the small adobe house in the desert, the place where her new life had begun. The days that followed settled into a peaceful, productive rhythm. Elena and David worked side by side, their hands often brushing as they passed tools or materials. A comfortable silence grew between them, punctuated by easy laughter. She found herself admiring the way his brow furrowed in concentration when he was fixing something, the gentle way he spoke to Sophia, the way his entire face would light up when Leo babbled at him. One afternoon, as Elena was watching him play with the baby, holding him up in the air to make him giggle, Leo looked at David and said his first real word, "Dada." The world seemed to stop for a second. David froze, his eyes wide with a powerful, unnameable emotion. He looked at Elena, a question in his eyes. She just smiled, a tear tracing a happy path down her cheek. In that moment, she knew. This was more than just a partnership of survival. This was the foundation of a new family. Respect was slowly, quietly, blossoming into love. That evening, however, a shadow fell over their newfound peace. David returned from his own small ranch over the ridge, his face troubled. "Someone's been in my tool shed," he said, his voice low. "The lock was broken." "Did they take anything?" Elena asked, her stomach tightening with a familiar dread. David hesitated for a long moment. "Just one thing," he said, his eyes dark with worry. "A full can of gasoline." The air in the small adobe house grew thick and cold. They both knew who had taken it, and they both had a terrible sinking feeling about why. The villains were not done with them yet. Their desperation had curdled into something far more dangerous. The premonition of disaster hung heavy in the air for 2 days. David stayed close, his calm demeanor now masking a tense vigilance. He patrolled the perimeter of the property at night, his powerful flashlight cutting through the darkness, searching for any sign of his half-brothers. The peace they had so carefully constructed felt fragile, like a thin pane of glass about to be shattered. The call came on the 3rd night. Elena was inside, rocking a sleepy Leo, while Sophia dozed in her chair by the fire. David had gone to his ranch to check on his livestock. Suddenly, Elena's phone, a cheap prepaid model David had bought for her, rang shrilly. It was David. "Elena!" His voice was sharp with urgency, stripped of its usual calm. "I found their truck. It's hidden in a ravine 1/2 mile from the house. They're coming for you on foot. They think I'm still here at my ranch. Get out of the house. Get out now. Grab Sophia and the baby and run for the main road. I'm on my way, but they'll get to you first. Go." The line went dead. For a single paralyzing second, Elena froze. Then the adrenaline hit her like a physical blow. She flew into motion. "Abuela, wake up! We have to go. Now!" she cried, shaking her grandmother's shoulder. Sophia's eyes snapped open, instantly alert to the panic in Elena's voice. Without a word, she was on her feet. Elena scooped the startled Leo into her arms, grabbing the single warm blanket they owned. She didn't even think about the box of letters. Her only thought was survival. They burst out of the house into the cold, moonlit night. The desert was eerily quiet. They started running, stumbling over the uneven ground, their lungs burning, heading in the direction of the distant highway. They had to get away from the house. In his hiding place, Luis watched them go. A sick, triumphant smile twisted his lips, his mind fueled by whiskey and rage, had settled on a simple, brutal logic. The house was the problem. The house was the source of all his humiliation, the symbol of his father's secret and his own defeat. If the house disappeared, the problem disappeared. If they were inside when it happened, even better. But this would do. This would send a message. Elena and Sophia had not made it 100 yards when two figures emerged from the shadows of the scrub brush, blocking their path. It was Luis and Jorge. Luis held the red can of gasoline. Jorge behind him was weeping silently, his face a mess of terror and regret. "Going somewhere?" Luis sneered. He looked unhinged, his eyes wide and manic in the moonlight. He was no longer just a greedy bully. He was a man who had been pushed over the edge into madness. "Luis, please," Elena begged, clutching Leo tightly. "Don't do this. Just let us go." Sophia stepped forward, her frail body radiating a powerful dignity. "For the love of God, stop this, Luis. I am your mother." Luis laughed, a high, unholy sound that echoed in the night. "You stopped being my mother when you chose them over me," he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Elena. "This house. Everything is because of this house. It should have been ours. He gave it to his bastard son." "Luis, no, please," Jorge cried, tugging at his brother's arm. "Let's just go. It's not worth this." Luis violently shook him off. He ignored them and stormed toward the adobe house, his movements jerky and crazed. He began splashing the gasoline against the old dry wooden doorframe and along the adobe wall, the fumes acrid and sickening in the cold air. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a lighter. With a click, a small flame flickered to life, dancing in his crazed eyes. At that exact moment, headlights appeared over the ridge, bouncing wildly as a truck sped across the rough terrain at a dangerous speed. It was David. But it was too late. With a final triumphant roar of rage, Luis threw the lighter. The wall of the house erupted in a sudden violent whoosh of fire. Flames shot 20 feet into the air, orange and yellow against the black desert sky, consuming the dry, ancient wood of the door and window frames in an instant. The heat was intense, a physical wave that pushed them all back. David's truck skidded to a halt a few yards away. He leapt out before it had even stopped moving, and with a guttural roar, charged at Luis, tackling him to the ground and knocking the gas can from his hands. But Elena wasn't watching them. She was staring at the fire. The house, their home, their sanctuary, was being devoured, and inside on the table was the box. Isabella's letters, the diary, the proof of their history, their identity, the foundation of their new life. She didn't think. She just acted. "Elena, no!" Sophia screamed. Handing the baby to her grandmother, Elena ran. She ran toward the inferno. She pulled the collar of her sweater up over her nose and mouth and plunged through the burning doorway into the smoke-filled room. The heat was suffocating, the smoke a blinding, choking cloud. The fire roared like a living beast. She could hear the crackle and pop of the old roof beams catching fire. Through the swirling black smoke, she saw it, the wooden box, sitting on the table, just a few feet from a wall of flames. She lunged for it, her hands grabbing the now hot wood. She clutched it to her chest. As she turned to flee, a loud crack echoed above her. A heavy burning roof beam crashed down, blocking the doorway, showering the room with sparks and embers. She was trapped. Panic seized her. She couldn't breathe. The smoke was a poison in her lungs. She stumbled back, looking for another way out. The small window was now a raging torrent of fire. She was going to die here. Suddenly, a section of the back wall exploded inward as David kicked it in, creating a ragged opening. He burst through the smoke, his face smudged with soot, his eyes wild with terror for her. "Elena!" he yelled, his voice hoarse. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the opening. Just as they scrambled through, the rest of the roof gave way with a deafening groan, collapsing inward in a shower of fire and flaming debris. They fell to the ground outside, gasping, coughing, sucking in the clean, cold night air. Elena was alive. They were all alive, and clutched tightly in her arms, charred and smoking but intact, was the wooden box. As she lay there, her lungs aching, the wail of distant sirens began to cut through the night. Red and blue lights flickered on the horizon, growing steadily brighter. David, in his panicked race to save them, had had the presence of mind to call 911. Police cars and a fire truck roared up the dirt track moments later. The scene they found was chaotic. A house fully engulfed in flames, David holding a coughing Elena, Sophia clutching a crying baby, and two men on the ground. One, Luis, was struggling furiously. The other, Jorge, was on his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Justice arrived swiftly and decisively. The firefighters began to battle the blaze, but it was clear the old house was a total loss. The sheriff's deputies, meanwhile, took control of the human chaos. David, his voice ragged, quickly explained what had happened. Then Jorge, his will completely broken, began to talk. Words poured out of him, a confession full of guilt and fear. He told them everything. About the forged documents, the expulsion, the threats, and Luis's insane plan to burn the house down. Luis was hauled to his feet, his face a mask of black hatred. As the deputy snapped handcuffs onto his wrists, his eyes met Elena's. There was no remorse in them, only pure, venomous defeat. He was arrested for arson, attempted murder, and a dozen other charges. Jorge, by becoming the state's primary witness, was taken into custody, his fate uncertain but infinitely better than his brother's. Elena stood there, wrapped in a blanket a deputy had given her, watching the flashing lights illuminate the faces of her family. The house was gone, a roaring pyre against the night sky, but they were alive, they were together, and they had the truth, safe in a charred wooden box. The trial by fire was over. In the cold, harsh light of dawn, the full extent of the destruction was laid bare. The adobe house was gone. All that remained was a smoking, blackened skeleton of charred beams and crumbled walls. The fire had taken everything, the furniture they had cleaned, the small pantry of food, the physical embodiment of their brief sanctuary. It was a heartbreaking sight. But as Elena stood there, clutching David's hand, she did not feel despair. She felt a profound, quiet sense of peace. The house was just a structure. The home was the people standing beside her. David looked at the ruin, then at Sophia and Elena, his face etched with sorrow and resolve. "My ranch house is too big for one man," he said, his voice soft but firm. "There are empty rooms. Come live with me, not as guests, as family." It was not an offer of pity. It was an offer of belonging. Sophia, her eyes shining with tears, nodded her acceptance. Elena looked at this kind, strong man who had become their protector, their family, and she knew she was finally, truly safe. That night, for the first time in months, she slept in a clean, warm bed, in a room with a solid door that locked, with the sound of her son's steady breathing in a crib beside her. She had found her harbor after a lifetime, in a storm. A week later, a call came from a lawyer, a public defender assigned to help Sophia navigate the legal mess her sons had created. With Jorge's detailed confession and testimony, the case was airtight. The fraudulent title transfer for the house in Las Cruces was annulled. It was officially Sophia's again, free and clear. For a moment, Elena thought they might go back, but Sophia was resolute. "That house is full of bad memories now," she declared, her voice firm. "It is tainted by greed. My home is here, on this land, with my family." She made a decision. She would sell the house in the city and use the money for a new purpose. "We will rebuild," she said, her gaze fixed on the desert horizon. "Right here. We will build a new house from the ashes of the old one." The trial was swift. The courtroom was a cold, formal place, but the testimony was white-hot with emotion. Jorge took the stand, his voice trembling as he recounted his brother's descent into greed and madness. But the most devastating testimony came from Sophia. She stood before the judge, a small, frail woman in a simple black dress, and spoke with a terrible, quiet dignity. The prosecutor asked, "Ma'am, is that man your son?" He pointed at Luis, who sat sullen and defiant at the defendant's table. Sophia looked at Luis, her gaze holding no hatred, only a profound, bottomless sorrow. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing through the silent courtroom. "That man is not my son. My son died a long time ago, and he was replaced by a stranger consumed by greed." The judge's words at sentencing were severe. "You violated the most sacred of bonds," he said, looking down at Luis with utter contempt, that of a son to his mother. "You chose greed over family, violence over love. You are a danger to society." Luis was sentenced to 25 years in a state penitentiary with no possibility of parole. Justice had been served. The chapter of fear and intimidation was finally, irrevocably closed. And so the rebuilding began. It was not just the construction of a house, it was the reconstruction of a life. With the funds from the sale of the city house, they had more than enough to build properly. David, with his practical knowledge, led the project, but Elena became his shadow, his apprentice, his partner. She learned to mix adobe, to frame walls, to read blueprints. Her hands, once soft, became calloused and capable. Her skin, once pale, tanned under the desert sun. She was no longer a victim waiting to be rescued. She was a builder, creating her own future with her own 2 hands. Leo grew from a baby into a toddler amidst the sounds of hammers and saws. He took his first wobbly steps on the new foundation, walking straight into David's waiting arms. The new house rose from the ground, a testament to their resilience. It was designed to echo the simple, traditional shape of the old one. But inside, it was modern and bright, with large windows to let in the light. One evening, as the house was nearing completion, David and Elena stood outside, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery colors. The air was cool and smelled of creosote and fresh lumber. David turned to her, his expression serious. "Elena," he began, his voice a little rough. "When I found you, I was a man living with ghosts. The ghost of a mother I missed and the ghost of a father I never knew. You gave me back my history. You gave me a family, you and Sophia and Leo. You made my house a home." He reached into his pocket, but he didn't pull out a velvet box with a diamond ring. He pulled out a simple small ring he had woven himself from a piece of twine taken from Sophia's new garden. He held it out to her. "You have rebuilt this house with me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Help me build a life. Marry me, Elena." Tears streamed down Elena's face, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the simple twine ring onto her finger. It was more precious to her than all the gold in the world. Years passed. The new adobe house stood proud and strong, a symbol of their journey. The business David had started, a small construction company specializing in traditional adobe homes, flourished, with Elena as its business manager. They had a second child, a daughter they named Isabella. Sophia lived to the ripe old age of 92, passing away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the laughter of the great-grandchildren she had once protected with her fierce dignity. On the mantelpiece of the new fireplace, in the heart of their warm and loving home, sat the charred but preserved wooden box. It was not a reminder of a dark secret, but a monument to their foundation. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the most painful endings are just the beginning of the most beautiful stories. One evening, years later, an older Elena and David sat on their porch, watching their own grandchildren play in the same yard where a desperate woman and her family had once stumbled out of the desert. They had created a small charitable fund in Sophia's name, one that helped other single parents and families who had been cast out by hardship, ensuring their own story of resilience would help others find their way home. The road that had once seemed so threatening, so full of despair, had by a strange and wonderful twist of fate led them home after all. Their story was a powerful reminder that no matter how dark the path, no matter how cruel the betrayal, the human spirit's capacity to rebuild, to forgive, and to love can make the final destination brighter than we ever could have imagined. The house stood as a testament not only to the cruelty humans can inflict upon one another, but to the incredible unyielding resilience of the heart. What did you think of this journey? This story teaches us that even when we are cast out into the desert of despair, we can find an oasis of hope, and that the truest family is not always the one we are born into, but the one we build with love and courage. It shows us that from the deepest ashes of loss, a new and stronger life can rise. If you believe in the strength of family, in second chances, and in the power of new beginnings, comment with the word resilience. Your engagement helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to you. Stories that remind us of the light that can be found even in the darkest of times. Thank you for listening to this entire story, for walking alongside Elena on her path from victim to victor. Your time and attention are the greatest encouragement we could ask for. We hope this tale has touched your heart. If it has, please leave your like on the video and subscribe to our channel to see more touching and inspirational stories just like this one. Your support means the world to us and allows us to keep sharing tales of hope and strength with everyone. Until next time, may you find the strength to rebuild your own life, no matter the challenges you face.